Hello and welcome back to Calathea. In the last episode we focused heavily on public transport with an internal train network and a connection to the outside line. We also put in some bus routes, some that go around the districts and some that act as a shuttle taking residents out to the train stations. There was a lot of forward thinking in the planning of this public transport network, and there is still more to come because obviously we haven't got a metro or a tram or any other sort of public transport in yet. But because the map still has a lot of empty gaps, we're not really able to put all of it in just yet. But it seems to be working pretty well so far. Lots of people are using the trains and the buses, and we seem to have reached an equilibrium with the amount of vehicles we need. There's been about a year of in-game time passed since the last episode was made. A lot of that was from taking first-person footage and from amending the capacity levels on the public transport. I also made some tweaks to some of the districts just to help with traffic flow and built a very small residential district up near the Spanish town, which will be extra footage on my TikTok and YouTube shorts. So far in this series, there's been a lot of focus on building the population and making industry, but we haven't really done anything fun yet. So today we're going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to be building two parks and the commercial side of Sunset Heights. One of them is going to be the squiggly area in the middle of Sunset Heights, and the other one is going to be on the outskirts of Primrose Heights. I originally wanted to build that park when I built Primrose Heights. I was so tired by the end of it and I couldn't possibly cram anything more into that episode, so I thought I'd push it to a later build. So today's build will add entertainment value and hopefully bring in lots of tourists. I recently reached level 5 with a city park and a nature reserve in Paloma Valley, and the city park is one of my favourite things that I've built in that series. So the area in Sunset Heights is already pretty clearly defined, whereas the area around Primrose Heights is very open, with no boundary except from the road and a few geographical details closer to the sea. I'm going to start today's build with Sunset Heights. It's not a massive area to be working with, but I'm going to try as hard as I can to make it an appealing city centre focus. think I'm finished with the city park. I didn't want to go too crazy with it, although it probably looks like I have. There aren't many assets in the city park catalogue to work with, and a lot of them are quite small, so I didn't want to just keep adding the same thing over and over again, but also it's not a huge space, so I feel like this has packed out a good amount. There's 4 entrances. The main entrance is actually on the north side because that's the flattest part, and then there's an entrance here, here and here. So these 2 are right next to bus stops, and this one is probably the closest to the metro station. So I tried to get the 3 areas where people will be coming in on public transport to entice them into the park. And I found with my Paloma Valley City Park that people do actually use it to get from one place to another. They would pay to go through the park so that they don't have to walk as far, which already looks like it's happening here because before I even finished building that, we got to level 2 because we'd had enough visitors. This is mostly vanilla assets with a few custom ones here and there. I wanted to keep this Spanish theme going into this district somehow, even though the Spanish town is all the way over here in the distance. I really love these ruined castle assets that came from the same creator, Highly Explosive Serenade. I used these in the space in between the campus area and Primrose Heights a few builds ago. So I thought I'd add some in here as well, and along with some of the vanilla assets over here with a few of the vanilla turrets, and they have the custom walls attached to them. And my thinking with using these assets is that there was once a castle here and it used to span over this entire part of the map. It was left, no one was taking care of it, it fell into disrepair, and then the people who live here came along and decided that they wanted to build a city centre on this area. But instead of bulldozing the whole lot, they would keep a few of the castle remains in the park. A lot of people walking around already, so that's a very good sign. And this build really didn't take me that long to make at all. It was pretty second nature actually after all of the builds I've been doing recently. So now we can move on to the commercial side of this district. Before I move on though, we're already at level 3, so I reckon by the time I'm done with the commercial side of this district, this will be maxed out. So over here we're going to have some commercial, some offices and some facility buildings. Like we're going to have the high school over here and a larger police station because they're really struggling with crime issues at the moment. And I might also add in a larger fire station as well if there's room, because things are constantly setting on fire and I want to make sure that they have enough fire engines to cover everything that's on this map. This is mostly going to be plopped, mainly because the asset sizes can vary so much and I don't want it to look odd with there being a tiny building next to a massive building. So it'll probably take a little bit longer than the park took to make, but it'll be worth it to have something that looks nice in the end. So I'm going to get stuck into building. Okay, so that's this side of the district done. It's a little bit unusual, I know. There are some very odd shapes in this part because of the roadmap. So I did kind of shoot myself in the foot a little bit by making the park so circular and then having the roads coming off of it. But I feel like I did a decent enough job with filling the spaces. So the first thing I did down here was to add a secondary school because they didn't have one in this district yet. And as I placed it, I looked at the kind of green roads to see where it would be kind of benefiting the most. It was pretty much kept to just this district and it didn't quite reach down here. Obviously the kids will still be able to come over here if they want to, but it's kind of as far away as you can get from that low income district over there. There's a football pitch and some parking lots, and I also put a library down as well. Because the secondary school comes in an orange swatch and the public library is a red brick building, I tried to put a few different brick buildings in this area as well, just to keep that theme running. But the majority of buildings in this district are just plain white. So there's a mix of vanilla and custom assets here. A lot of them again are from the same creator that I've been using a lot in this build. And you can see the similarities in this commercial building, this one, and these flats, for example. Very similar decorated outside spaces, the same props are used a lot, so that's all from the same person. There's a few vanilla ones in here as well. I'm not so happy with that yellow brick building down there, but it's so hidden away I don't really care at this point. I don't really want to go back through and amend it all again. I put the district fire station down here for now because it didn't really fit anywhere else and I didn't have a big enough asset for it to really be meaningful, so I just put it down here until I can find somewhere better to put it. A lot of awkward spaces in these gaps back here, so as usual I tried to fill them with a little bit of detailing. Put some parking spaces. I know they're not exactly straight, but I don't really care. And I've used some of these planters as well because there is actually back of the secondary school down here where the kids theoretically could walk out of. I don't think they actually will, but they could if they wanted to. I tried to gate off these green bits because they were such an awkward shape. I thought it would be better to fence them off and turn them into kind of like a tropical garden rather than just having them with the ruined edges up against the concrete. So now there's a gap walking through from the city centre through to the school bit, so it's easier to get through. And same back here, a little bit detailing just with some parking spaces, but this was a very awkward and large space, so I couldn't really do anything else back here. There's a few taller buildings on this side of the district because there's tall buildings over here as well, but the majority of them are kind of a mid-height. But as we go down this way into the rest of the city, there will be other super high-rise buildings over there, so it's not going to stick out like a sore thumb for long. Down here I've kind of smushed a lot of buildings together to create longer units that look the same, so these two and these two have kind of been pushed together, and then there's 3 of these back here as well. This asset here is from the workshop. I believe that it is a replica of the LAPD headquarters, but don't quote me on that because I don't actually know what the headquarters look like, it's just what the asset was called. So it's a very interesting shape. It's got this kind of triangular piece with a plaza out the front. I'm not a fan of this bright green, but I can't change it with the bob tool, so it's going to have to stay like that for now. I don't think it's too noticeable really. And I like how there's kind of different entrances around the side. So there's a little, I'm guessing this is what would be a parking garage down here for the police cars. And there's some detailing around the back as well with another entrance underneath there. So I pushed this back off the road a little bit and put some other assets down alongside it. This little one here is from the workshop. It's very, very cute and small. It came in a few different swatches. This is pink, but I feel like it's the closest one to white that I could find. It was either that or a sage green or navy blue or kind of a browny red, and I didn't feel like they quite fit right. So from a distance it looks white. There's another one of these planters down here just to fill this gap because, like I said, there's a lot of awkward spaces. Down here is where I've used these modular buildings again. I used them in the San Francisco build. So this has kind of created a rounded front on this awkward shaped piece here. Because the zonable area goes all the way down into this point, but obviously we can't really fit anything down there. I thought I'd create this large building in this space and kind of overlap the buildings a little bit to make it fit so that it's not just awkward buildings placed together like this one in this corner. These are both the same. But I actually lowered this one slightly so that it doesn't clip through the roof. I'm not sure if that's going to cause me problems with the terrain, but it means that it doesn't clip through the roof now, so it looks like it's, you know, meant to be like that. And through here is a few unique buildings. These are all from the same creator on the workshop. You can't really see from this angle, it's terrible lighting, but they've got really lovely decoration, very modern, very simple, clean lines, and they go well with a lot of the other buildings that I've been using recently. They will function as unique buildings. They look like offices, and that's all I care about. This is a lower block of this same building style. There's two different heights, and this is just a very simple square. It's similar to the ones from the Modern City Centres DLC, but it's a lot more stripped back and plain, which I think is needed here when there's so much going on. These two are both unique buildings from the same creator that made these. A little bit different. This one's got a kind of pointed front to it. This one's got a bit of an odd angle to it. But I wasn't really sure what to do with this back bit here, because this is going to be kind of continuation into the town, but because it's right next to the train line, I didn't want to make it too tall. So I added a few of these kind of shopping mall things and a couple of these vanilla office assets. These are actually one of my favourite vanilla buildings because they have little balconies on the corner, and there's actually someone sitting at that table. It looks like it's flats above an office, and even though it's not, I feel like that's what they were going for, and it's a really lovely colour as well, very simple. The back here is actually a mix of two different types of assets. This building is massive, but I thought that I would put these modular pieces around the edge and kind of do a little bit of sneaky smushing to get them to fit together, because otherwise it was a very awkward space to fill around this massive piece. But I think it looks kind of good next to this one where they're kind of very grand frontages. So I am happy with that. And then the last thing I did down here was to bring in a bit more of that old Mediterranean feel. The first build that we did was very, very heavily Mediterranean inspired, but I didn't want to lose that theme as we went through the other builds. So because we've added some assets into the city park, I thought it would only be appropriate to add some pieces to the entrance of the city as well. So I like to imagine that the pieces in the city park are the pieces that they couldn't save, so they decided to build a park around it, but these bits have been preserved and they are now functioning as tourist attractions. And they are the first things that you see really when you come in. Even though from back here it's awful lighting, it's a very grand building, this cathedral. I don't think there's any actual animations that come with these assets because they are custom ones, but I think they look good in this district to remind us that this is a Mediterranean inspired build. So that's now the high-end residential, the low-income neighbourhood and the commercial side of this district done. The train station is extremely busy, and I am a little bit worried about the traffic on the roads because it's really starting to back up and there's a million intersections, which is totally my own fault, and adding the park entrance down there is probably not helping because people are just driving up there to go to the park. I'm hoping that people will start using public transport instead, but lots of traffic means that we've got a good population and people actually want to come to this area, so I'm not seeing it as a bad thing. We're never going to have perfect roads, are we? So I'm not too mad. So obviously we've still got the beachfront to do of this district, but that's going to come in a future build. So I'm going to leave this district for now and move on to the other park build for this episode. Now this park area is going to be a little bit more free flowing, and it's going to act as a bit of a barrier between Primrose Heights and the rest of the city. I want to continue the Mediterranean ruined castle theme going through this park, but the main focus of the park area is going to be a castle. I've downloaded some assets from the workshop specifically for this. So this park is going to have the nature reserve classification just because I want to use some of the assets from that park type in this build. But it's not going to be a nature reserve in its true sense because there's not going to be cabins or tents or campfires or anything like that. It's not going to be a gated park like the last one because I need to be able to get roads up to some of the assets. So we're not necessarily looking for profit for this park. So I'm kind of trying to mould what we have in the game to what I want to build. This is partially inspired by the Gibralfaro Castle in Málaga. I'm sorry about the pronunciation, I probably butchered that, but it's basically a very old castle on the top of a hill in the centre of the city. So you've got built up stuff on all sides, but it's this little haven of history and nature with some really beautifully preserved stonework and a little cafe at the top. So let's get stuck into it. this is the ruined castle park complete. I had a lot of fun making this one actually. It's very different to a lot of the things that I've done before, and trying to find creative ways to use the same assets over and over again was a challenge, but I feel like I did a pretty good job with it. So this piece up on the top here is kind of the focal piece of this whole park. It's a ruined castle park asset from the workshop, and it actually has actions with it, so there's people walking around inside, which is quite cool. I put a few things around it, like this lookout towers. I imagine you could go up there and get a different angle look into the castle, or you could look out over the rest of the city. And there's a restroom around here and a cafe. Now I didn't like how there was kind of road and pathway bits attached to this asset, so I used the same tile from this cafe asset to fill this area in to kind of artificially extend it. Now I couldn't get rid of the road unfortunately, so I used a couple of these gazebo things to put on either side, and one of them has like an information booth in it. I should probably put a bench in the other one just to make it look like there's something going on in there, but I didn't really think about that at the time. I put a few more benches out the front just to make it look like the space is being used. There's one of these kind of floating cafes over here again. It's the same as the asset I used in the Rich District. I thought the people on the end of this cafe will have a great view into this castle here and out onto the rest of the city. There's also a lookout perch here, which again has really great views into some of the things on the lower part of this park and out into the rest of the city. And there's one on this side as well that looks out in the other direction towards this town and the sea. So as I mentioned earlier, I used a lot of the same props, but had to kind of configure them in different ways around to make them look a bit more interesting. But this is actually a full park asset that people will go and visit, and I dotted a few of these vanilla and custom castle props around it to make it look like this castle was once connected all the way down the hill, but the pieces in between have broken and fallen away. So I put the archway over the road in a few different places because I thought it looks like a bit of a grand entrance. So this is a mix of pedestrian roads and pathways. As a lot of these pieces are assets rather than props or park assets, if that makes sense, they needed to be on an actual road rather than a pathway. I did try and ban private vehicles from these roads, but it looks like the pocket cars have struck again and they do keep appearing all over the place. I've also used a couple of Mediterranean churches, and I've attached this one to the vanilla ruined castle asset with a few of the custom walls. Now this one actually has an invisible footpath going through the middle, through this door here, and then out through this bit here, and I've put like an information board and a couple of benches in the middle. I don't know if people will actually walk through there. I don't think they really have any reason to, but they can if they want to. And like I just mentioned, there's another cathedral up on the hill here, and a larger piece of not so ruined castle down here. And there's also a few restrooms and cafes dotted about because they didn't actually have any reason to walk around this part, but there will be an entrance on this side once this part of the city has been built up. There's also a cafe and restroom down here on the flatter ground. I did a tiny bit of detailing down here. I don't think people will actually come up here, but I wanted to use different terrain heights and none of the larger assets would fit up here, and I didn't want to do another lookout tower, so these were the smallest pieces that I could fit on this very small piece of land. I don't think people will actually come up here, but it looks like they can. I know these are really steep, but some of the pathways that we walked up to get to the castle in Malaga were steeper than that. Like, no joke, they were steeper than that. And I did it in really, really cheap sandals with no grip on a hot day, and it was a really smooth pathway. There was no grip on it at all, so I'm very surprised that I didn't fall over and just go tumbling back down the hill again. But another thing that was kind of on the pathways up to the top of the castle was these trees and succulents and plants that were growing out of this really steep terrain just like this, and they were kind of clinging on for dear life. Some of them were pretty much on the brink of death, but that's why I included some trees on this really steep terrain here, because this was something that I actually saw in real life. So I'm pretty happy with how this park came out. I think it looks appropriately Mediterranean for the vibe that we've gone for in the city build, and it makes a great barrier between this upper class district and the rest of the city, because these houses would actually end up being quite close to the rest of the build here, but because there's a bunch of trees and a massive hill in the way, the people that live and work over here won't actually really be able to see into those houses unless they're really, really high up. So once I've built up this part of the city, there will be some entrances over here. But for now, I think I am done with this build. That was 3 very different things that I built today. The first one being the city park in the center of Sunset Heights. I didn't mention this earlier, but it did get to level 5 before I even finished building the commercial side of this town. So I am pretty happy with how busy it is. Seems to be that people are using it to get from one side of the district to another, which is great. That's exactly what I wanted it to be. And it's bringing in a huge amount of tourists and kind of messing up the roads a little bit, but I'm not too fussed about that. The commercial side of this district is finished too. They now have a secondary school, a public library, a police headquarters, and a few unique buildings as well. And I tried to keep a bit of this Mediterranean theme going with a cathedral and a coliseum over here. And I've decided in the future, when we put the metro system in, there's going to be a stop in the middle of the cathedral and the coliseum here, so that it's near the station and the park and right in the centre of all of the tourist attractions. All in all, I'm very happy with what I've done today. I feel like it's starting to make the city feel like a proper, vibrant, lively place. And it's also carrying themes through from one district to another, so it's not so disparate. I had a suggestion on one of my last videos to have more first-person walkthroughs, and I will definitely be doing that because I now have the first-person camera mod. I didn't have it up until now, so expect to see a few extra videos with first-person walkthroughs of the districts or the public transport routes, because this build feels very, very different from the ground, and it makes me feel even happier about what I've been doing, because not to blow my own trumpet, but it looks even better from the ground. In the next episode, I'll be working on more of the city centre to bridge the gap between these two districts. This area is going to be a lot more high-rise than Sunset Heights as we move into the IT district. Make sure to check out my TikTok for extra content, including some additional residential builds and some tips and tricks to help you out with your cities. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. you.